Lequita Brooks here. I am your social impact speaker and strategist. Welcome to Social Impact Sundays at 6, where we have massive social impact that leads to income. And today we have Nikita Marsh. She is, oh my goodness, she is a financial social worker that is an executive and project manager. And this is the really awesome thing about Nikita is that she's went from micro social work to macro social work. She does some teaching. She's an executive in the financial industry. She does a variety of things. And that's the thing that I love about social work, how we can just transition and evolve and become into whatever we desire this occupation to be. And this degree. So Nikita, welcome.
Good morning. How you doing?
I am doing great. And I just love it when I work with or even talk with, social workers on interviews who actually started in like a child welfare type of role, foster care. So that was your beginning. So just tell us a little bit about that and how you were able to maneuver because sometimes social workers feel stuck. And
Yeah.
clearly, you have not been stuck. Like you went from doing foster care all the way to being a social work executive in the financial industry. So
Well, and I
I
can
would
I
like,
can actually kind of tell you, well, because at a point I did feel stuck, right? So I think if we go back to the beginning, I did 18 years in health and human services specific to um, child welfare, adolescent programming. So I supported foster care programming and did a lot of foster care administration work and psychiatric residential treatment facility work. So running those hospitalization programs, residential treatment facilities, like the community-based residential treatment facilities for youth and young adults. And I did that work and I loved it, right? So I literally started doing this work when I was an undergrad. And of course, nobody's degree, you're trying to get the credentials to get your name, just to be able to be able to be in the space, right? To be in the room. So I've done this, I did it forever, is what it felt like. So I always define social work and child and family services social work as my first career, right? So you see this delineation between what I did then, what I do now, and where those transitions kind of happened. But I think, like a lot of us, after 18 years, I got burnout was part of it, but I was angry. I was angry with the system because I'm just like, we keep doing the same thing, expecting something different, and it's not working for us. It's not working for these children. It's not working for these families. And I kept working for these organizations that were about the they were about the dollar, right? They were about the dollar. And in my last social work role, the owner of the organization told me, you are not responsible um, to make sure that they're safe. You're responsible to make sure we have enough of them in the beds. And I quit my job. And like I remember I called my husband, I was in tears because I was like, this is not what I signed up for. This is not the work that I do. I am solely responsible for making sure that these children are safe, that these parents are okay. And you just told me that that was not the expectation for my job. So I quit. And I battled a lot with that because by quitting, I was saving myself, but I wasn't, but like who was still going to save these kids, right? Who was still going to do this work? So I struggled a lot with that. But then really had to kind of sit down and figure out what's next. And that's how I transitioned into financial social work.
wow, that it was like a chill went through my body. Like, oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
because where do they do that, right? Like who and how when we get into this field, the intention and the work that we drive to do is about the people. It's and specifically when you're working with children, it's about these babies. And to be I was a regional director for the organization, and to be told that that's not your responsibility. We just need to know that we have this many of them in the bed to meet the monetary benefits that we need to fulfill the budget requirements. it didn't work for me.
Yeah, and one of the things I really value about what you said was that you were in the profession and then you got to a point where you became angry because you
Mhm,
didn't like how the clients were being treated, or even just the mindset of what leadership felt like your role should be.
mhm.
And that's the point where you were like, you know what? I could continue to be angry. I could sit here and complain, but no, I'm going to make the decision to step away. I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to and really dig deep and say, well, what's going to be next for me? So
Yeah.
I can have that fulfillment and get back to the real root of why I went into social work. And that was to help humans. That was to
Right, exactly.
better the lives of people. So tell us, so what happened next?
So what happened next? Being type A, I am very like particular about things being a certain way, being in order. And at that moment, the first thing I did was have a total meltdown, right? Like I completely lost it. Like, wait a second, what did you just do? What do you mean you quit your job? Like, and then it was hilarious, like looking back on it because I gave a notice when I quit. And my husband's just like, you don't even owe them a notice. You just need to leave, right? I was like, but I got put a plan in place, right? So it was this whole thing about even what that looks like. So when I left, I initially took some time just to kind of get myself together, right? And figure out um, what to do next. So I started to do some consulting work. I had a company that I worked for before, went back and did some consulting work for them. And then I started an event planning business because in my, you know, all of the hobbies and talents that we have, I love like events and decor and all of these things. And I was like, oh, well, I'll do that. That'll be fun. And started to do that and was picking up a little bit of traction, but it really wasn't like what I wanted it to be. And I was like, well, I don't know about this. And my husband says to me, he's just like, you need to go into project management. And I was like, I've never done that before. He was like, yeah, that's all you do. That's all you've done. Um, but basically it was a dare. He dared me. He dared me. He said, read the PMBOK, which is the project management book of knowledge. Read the PMBOK. If you read this book and it's not the work that you've done, shopping on me, go buy whatever you want, knock yourself out, have a good time. If it is the work that you've done, if it aligns to what you do and what you've done, then you have to get the certification. And I got into about chapter 3 of the book and realized that it was everything that I had been doing. And that specifically in administrative social work, we don't have project managers. You are just now starting to see. So in 2002, 2004, you didn't have a social work project manager, right? That was not a thing. We ran our projects under the director title, the administrative title, and that's what we did because they don't want to call us social work project managers because then they have to pay us as social work project managers, right? So started reading the book, started doing a study, and just really started making the connections between the language that we used in social work and the language that they were using in project management. Um, so I studied for about 6 months total, probably about truly about four if I consolidate the time, but over a 6 month time period, I studied for about 4 months, took the certification, got my project management certification, and then said, what skills, how do I redefine my skills? Because we are very inundated in social work language, right? And that transforms into how we speak, how we present ourselves. So when people even talk about what is social work, the automatic thought around what is social work is, oh, this is somebody who you work with the kids or you take people's kids out their houses, right? Like that's what people think when they think social work. And so for me, it was about how do I rebrand what that is when I present it to other people, specifically because I know that the work that I'm looking to do now is not aligned with traditional social work. So I spent a lot of time revamping what my resume looks like, figuring out how to use that project management language to define the social work, the projects and the activities that I had done in that work, figuring out how do I convert this, right? How do I get A to equal B? And I'm saying the same thing, but I'm saying it in the language that's going to be, more receptive in this industry. So it was a lot of work, a lot of God, a lot of prayer, a lot of opportunity. I tell you, I went to interview on interview on interview, and folks would say to me, "Oh my gosh, you have wonderful skills. Oh my gosh, we absolutely love you. However, you don't have experience in this industry." Right. And literally got to the point where I got a call from an HR person, to the point where I said to her, I was like, you know what, can you talk to the hiring manager? If they're not willing to hire someone who does not have direct financial experience, then there's no need for us to even have this conversation, because we've done this. I've done this circle. And she said, well, I thought about that before I called you. I spoke with the hiring manager. If you know projects, she can teach you, the financial industry components of what you do. And that literally is how I landed my first role.
You've said a mouthful. You've talked about branding. You've talked about perseverance. You've talked about converting social work language to the career and life you desire. And the thing that's amazing is that it started from your husband planting a seed.
Yes, absolutely.
And in your world, it's your husband. But for other people, that's why it's so important for us to have the right people in our inner circle.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of times we only know what we know. We can't see what other people see within us.
Absolutely. Right. And the thing was, he would come home, because my husband's in cybersecurity. And so he would come home and he would always be complaining about these project managers, right? Or the fact that, they had really good ones and they had really, really bad ones. And he's just like, I just know that you could do this work so much better than it. Because he would bring the problems home and talk about them. I'm like, well, why didn't they just do this? Or why didn't they approach it this way? And he's like, right, exactly. Right. So for him, like, he was seeing things, like you said, that I wasn't seeing. For me, it was just conversation with him. But for him, like, these bells and whistles and lights were going off. Like, do you not see what you're doing? Like, you are able to strategize this work that you don't even touch. You don't know anything about it. If you can strategize it just from our conversations, imagine what you can do when you're in the room.
Imagine. And guess what? You don't even have to imagine, because you're doing it now.
And I am, and I love it. And I love it. And I think the biggest, and I mean, I guess even to kind of give some of the backstory, right? Because imposter syndrome is real. So I get this first role, and I start with a Fortune 50 financial company. So huge opportunity. And I go in as a project manager. And of course, I understand projects. I know how to run projects. But again, I'm in a space where everybody speaks a different language than what I'm accustomed to. So I'm building acronym live glossaries, and I'm taking like, I got a notebook. I can pull every notebook and every note that I've written from 2019 when I started working for the bank. And just because, like, it was so imperative to me to capture everything that was being said in the space, so that then I could take it away and try to make it make sense, because it felt like someone was speaking German to me. And then I had to be able to, like, take that in, ingest it, and give you something beneficial out. So I remember being in this space, and one of my colleagues called me one day and he said, Nikita, he said, the thing I'm going to tell you, two things. There's nothing in this space that you can break that we can't fix. And nobody's going to die. Right. And the stress from my previous roles were, if I break something, it's going to be a real big problem and somebody could die. Right. I ran treatment, like medical treatment facilities. Somebody could die. So those words were freedom for me. Like, it gave me the ability to kind of let go of some of the anxiety and bring myself into the space. And literally, I focused on asking questions. I'm the newbie here, so I played the I don't understand it. I don't know role. Make this make sense to me. Can you explain that to me in layman's terms? And what I started to find out in those rooms was most of them knew the language, but they didn't know what they were talking about either, right? Like they could not explain it to me in layman's terms, which means you didn't really understand how it works, which gave me the opportunity to start using these social work skills. Like I'm a clinically trained therapist, right? I don't carry the license anymore, but I still had the training, right? I went through all of the process. So I know how to ask questions. I know how to get people communicating. I know how to resolve conflicts. And the initial role that I went into, that was half the battle with the teams. You had the old school folks who've been there forever, who were used to doing it their way. You had the younger generation that was coming in who wanted to try new things, and they were doing this. They could not come together to make a decision. So they weren't making any progress. So my job then became teaching them how to communicate with each other, right? What is our end goal? What are we actually trying to accomplish? This is what I hear you saying. This is what I hear you saying. If I combine these two things, this is where we meet in the middle. And the bulk of my job for the first 2 years was just that.
Using those good old social work skills.
Right, right. And the funny part about it is, like, even to this day, when I tell this story, when I say what I do, and they're like, okay, so what's your background? Oh, I have a master's degree in social work. Well, how did you? Right. But literally, there is no place that you cannot take these skills. There's no industry that exists that is not about communication, is not about conflict resolution, is not about being able to facilitate dialogue between people and get them to hear themselves, right? I walk into rooms, even so in my current role, my title is a process engineer, right? And so what I do for the organization is I go in and I build these huge diagrams. So these big visual diagrams that show you what are the steps in your process. Where do you have gaps? Where's there opportunity for automation? Where are you having time deficiencies? Where do we have these lags in time that we're losing time where we can enhance this process? How do we optimize this process? That's what I do in my current role. And even in that, I'll walk into this space and it's still from a social worker perspective, a social work perspective. My first question is, what do you need to make your job easier? My job is to make your job easier. If I can make your job easier, I've checked off my box for the day, and your life is a little bit better. You're a little bit more efficient at what you do. You're getting a little bit more pleasure out of what you do. So to the point where I've driven this so much that when my teams email me with things that they know are complex, are going to be a challenge, they email me and they say things like, okay, I need you to pull out your pixie dust and your magic wands, because that's the language that I use with them. When I'm like, if you could sprinkle pixie dust on this, if you could take a magic wand to this, give me your best day vision. We all know that's a therapy concept, right? Give me your perfect day. What's your utopian state? All of those are therapy concepts. I use that to drive these conversations in this industry.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Did I say like, oh my gosh, I love it. A whole social worker using social work skills in the banking industry.
Yeah.
So tell me, what would you say or what advice would you share for someone who has a social work background just like you and they desire to, get into the financial industry or banking industry? What would you
Mhm.
say to them?
I would say self-assess. Self-assess. Look at yourself. Look at the skills that you have. Like, so for me, numbers, I've always been, even in my social work administration career, I was always the person who was about the numbers, right? I always understood the numbers. I always like needed them to make sense. Like I understood the fact that we needed to meet these margins and have these bottom lines, but that we also needed to do that not at the expense of these children and of these families. So how do we find the middle ground on that, right? So take a self-assessment, look at the skills that you have. And I say that for any industry. So not just social work, because or not just banking, right? If you are I end up having this conversation a lot with teachers who are trying to transition out of education and they have these skills and they've done these things and they don't know what to do next, right? So I have a lot of those conversations. For social workers, I say the same thing. Look at the skills that you have and determine areas where they can also be beneficial, because that's what I did. Like, I did not come out of this and initially say, okay, I think I'll go to banking, right? I sat down, I looked at the skills that I had, and I said, what other industries do these skills align to? And banking was where I ended. Um, so I would always like start with that recap, like write it down, look at it, make it real for you. And then Google search, right? Use Google. Okay, I have these skills. What types of jobs line up with these skills? And then start to do your search from there.
Amazing suggestion. So what's next for you, Nikita?
What's next? I guess long-term goals. I would love to be a C-suite member um, in the banking industry. So that is basically your top 10% of executive level roles in the bank. Um, so I really enjoy the process work that I do. And I like the way that we drive that. And we're really trying to drive that and push that across the organization. So long term, I would love to be able to do that. I think the other thing that I really want to do is to start establishing some consulting work where I'm having these conversations, right? So where I'm able to sit with social workers, to sit with educators, to sit with women who, because we graduate from high school, we have an idea of what we want to do with ourselves, we go to college, we get these degrees, we start to do this work, and we realize that, wait a second, maybe this wasn't where my skills best aligned, right? Or I've done it so long and now I want to do something different, but I don't know how to do that. So my next steps are really trying to figure out a way to craft or create an environment that is welcoming, um, to women specifically who are trying to make those transitional changes.
Yes, to transitions. So how can these women get in contact with you?
Ah, that's funny. Right now, so I don't have any like websites or any of those things set up. My Facebook is pretty locked down. So if you want to reach me directly, I would honestly tell them to contact Lakita and have you make those connections, right? Those introductions. But I am in a lot of the social work groups, like the program and project management groups on social media. Again, I have not like taken the steps to formalize this in any way. And so honestly, that question is going to push me, Lakita, to be more intentional. You said you were going to do that when we started this conversation, so I do think that question is going to push me a little bit more to be more intentional about having a way for folks to connect with me.
And that's the great thing about these type of conversations. It's about awareness. Like if we don't
Yeah.
know what we don't know, or if we haven't thought about what we don't know, then we're not even aware that it's even something that I might even need to consider.
Right, right. And for me, it's definitely been that thing. Like funny because one of those things that I did in my downtime in that transition time was start to build websites. So I've built so I know how to do it, right? These are skills that I have. I literally started to tap in to all of these skills that I had, or just trying to try my hands at things and really try figuring out that, hey, you're good at this. Hey, this is something that is in your wheelhouse that you might not have realized was in your wheelhouse. So I have 2 weeks off for Christmas that I took off, and now I got to go build a website so folks can reach out to reach out to me.
Oh my goodness. I
I
love that,
appreciate the
Nikita.
challenge.
And I just thank you so much for joining us today on Social Impact Sundays at 6. I am Lequita Brooks, your host and social impact speaker and strategist. Make sure you go to booklakita.com for speaking engagements. Until next time, have an amazing day.
Thank you.